We feel that truth has to be found out to be true, and that what we believe theologically is the truth. But the reality is, we appreciate the values that some people have, and we accept their theology in consequence. So, in the case of Todd and the restaurant manager, the manager had an experience in his youth when he trusted the pastor, and the pastor was not found to be genuine. So he now could no longer accept the theology that the pastor supposedly had, because the pastor didn't have it. He was, in effect, pretending to have a certain theology and pretending to have certain values. It was found that he didn't have those values and therefore couldn't have the theology. The theology was, in some sense, proved to be invalid by the values that the restaurant manager found his youth pastor to actually have. In other words, the youth pastor's religion was on a very shaky foundation. It depended on the good character of his pastor. And if the pastor's character was not found not to in fact be good, then theology was thrown out the window. The whole thing was fraud. And where am I now? Oh, a bit bitter and twisted, poor chap. You could say witness, hence the knee. Being injured. You know, he's lame. He's handicapped. In Christian terms, then you could say that his faith was not on a sure foundation. It was on the guru, the pastor, who was not up to it. And therefore, restaurant manager's faith was not up to it either. It all collapsed. This is put right by Todd in that he gives the restaurant manager a reason to be overwhelmingly grateful to God, as he sees it, a miracle, putting his handicap right, his knee. And now the manager feels utterly open to receiving the faith again. Does this validate the faith? Obviously in itself doesn't prove that the Christian faith is true, only proves that his knee is now fine, and it wasn't before, and it's to do with Todd praying. So really the restaurant manager is believing because he's found a new guru, Todd, who confirms the faith. He's a new guru in that he's been the channel of his healing to his knee, which is very important to him. And he's happy and willing to accept his old faith, and everything seems to be wonderful. But in fact, he's not on firm ground. I mean, Todd down the line could be found to be suspect in some way, say. And then, well, we're back to square one. Now you compare this to the Muslim that embraces Todd. They embrace each other. Why? Because they've got common values. They're both so ardently, sincerely doing what they understand to be right. And not only that, what they understand to be right is a concern for each other, even though the other, in their own view, has a different theology. Wow. Their embrace says that having values in common, certain values, integrity and, so forth, a conception of God, need for God, great desire to rescue people that don't have this, is common to both. They identify with each other despite their difference of theology. Now that's what we mean by spiritual. And that's the real lesson of this program of 2 events of Todd's ministry. And I think they both realise it. The restaurant manager's return to Christianity is felt to be wonderful, and in a sense it is, but the manager's still at risk should Todd not come up to the mark, in his estimation, dramatically, just like his youth pastor had failed to come up to the mark. In other words, from the Christian point of view, the manager's still on shaky ground. Whereas from the spiritual point of view, the Muslim and Todd actually are on very firm ground. It's a question of values, not a question of religion and theology. You may say they have a certain theology that's in common, namely the primacy of God, but in a situation where you can't prove God. But you do find that the other has the same values as you in a very impressive way. And it is this affinity that you've discovered. You've found, in effect, the inferiority of theology compared to the affinity of values. You see, you enter heaven because you now have the right values, not to wreck the place, not the right religion. And those values are firmly anchored in you. Witnessed by the praise and gratitude you have to God for all his love and care to you as you see it in your life. That is the understanding of the foundation on which your life eternal rests. It's not your theology. You've almost certainly got that wrong. And certainly bits of it are wrong, and quite fundamental bits, or things that seem fundamental. I suppose in a simple way we're saying ethics are more important than theology. But it's safer to say principles, I think, because ethics are so associated with being spelt out by the theology that, you see, Todd and the Muslim just found they loved each other. Because they have the same values. This earnestness, this concern for truth, this battle to understand. And they're so impressed with the other having the same values, despite a different religion. It's quite something, isn't it? And it is the hope of a world so split by religious dogma. It's not the religion that counts. It's these values that actually both sides ascribe to their God. Because it is these values that is their God. It's the values that count, not the theology. The theology buttressed the values. But many theologies can buttress, hold up the values and support them and be consistent with their values, but not agree with each other. Whereas the values are what count. That is, if you like, spiritually the core. Values. Malcolm X can, on jihad, come across people of every race and colour being good Muslims as regards practicing the faith. And suddenly colour is like theology. It's in some sense not the fundamental thing. In this case, it was not associated with having the right theology. So Malcolm X is converted now to believing that there are whites and so on who are good Muslims, faithful and true, and cannot be rejected. So they're not rejected because they're white. They're accepted because they got the right values. In this case, the right theology. They are true Muslims. But being a true Muslim means true values. Namely, accepting and helping and a blessing to each other. Whether they're white or black makes no difference. And Malcolm X is transformed by the experience. He's found that whites have the same values as himself. Not necessarily, but then many blacks don't necessarily have the same values as himself either. And for sure he will have come across people that claim to be earnest Muslims, but don't in reality have the same values. And that will be anathema to him too, just like the Christian. And will cause the schisms in Islam, just as you have schisms in Christianity. But it's values that count. And they're something that's more important to the individual than what you're claiming to believe. So when the restaurant owner finds that his youth pastor doesn't in fact have the values, then the youth pastor loses all credibility in the eyes of the manager in his youth. And the acceptance of the religion lay in its correspondence to the values that the youth pastor has. So we get a bitter and twisted manager as regards the Christian religion, because he no longer sees it as matching the values that he truly values. It's what he values that counts. And he's bitter about the false religion that followed from, as he saw it, found to be a false youth pastor. In other words, to him, the validity of the religion depended on the values of the youth pastor, not the logic of the religion, the theology. The theology must be up the spout if it's consistent with a corrupt youth. If it's consistent with a corrupt pastor. Well, the upshot of this is quite simply that your religion, your theology, is not to be valued, but your values are what are to be valued. And the religion may help you keep these values or may not. Now, holding to a good religion may transform your values to what the good values are of that religion. And it seems there's a variety of religions that can be good in this respect. It doesn't mean to say there aren't some religions that are quite anti the values that are right in some sense. Now, when it comes to values, which values are right? Well, we think that's something to do with truth now. We really do. We think that our values are right if they are in some sense consistent with reality. Take a simple value like thou shalt not kill. Does such a principle protect life or not? Well, it might not if you don't go to war against someone who's destroying you and your family and your nation. In other words, you may have to break this principle in certain cases. Why is that? You've got something more important. Yes, life. Life of my loved ones. Oh, well, perhaps that's your basic principle. Not non-violence at all. Supposing I do not keep such a basic principle. Supposing I have a principle that says, no, I should value all life equally. I cannot kill the person who is attacking myself and my children and family. There seems to be something fundamentally suspect about this because you tend to get wiped out. People of your persuasion are not likely to pass on to the next generation. They keep getting wiped out by the aggressor, and there are aggressors in the world. That's the reality. There are people that simply wish to own the source of your livelihood rather than you. If you treat them equally, be kind towards them, and take the opportunity to kill you and your family. And then we have a paradox that apparently those that are truly good, the non-violent among us, and those that treat everybody equally, don't give priority to family or the aggressor, get wiped out. They're not a sustained, surviving generation. There's something about reality that says we are wrong in the principle. In other words, you may use violence and kill the enemy where you have to protect what you value. And what you value is the life of yourself and those near and dear to you that help in your own life. And you should protect such, and you should use violence if necessary. You found the truth that the priority of self is valid. Now this is an astonishing conclusion. This is not what we normally think of as the noble foundation of any religion, any set of values. Surely we're to value others. No, you are to love others, but not as yourself. Some people you have to treat as a heathen man, and the inference is that's not warm, tender fellowship by any means. You keep them out. You don't let them wreck your life. To give an Old Testament example, David's right-hand general, who basically is out to kill Absalom because he will kill the king. And the general sees his reason for living and welfare to be the king's continuance, not Absalom's. Now, by the grace of God, he doesn't end up actually killing Absalom. Absalom kills himself, gets tangled in the tree with his long hair, which of course is in some sense his vanity, which has brought his death, of course. His vanity has caused him to seize his father's kingdom. Before time, he would have got it in the end anyway. I mean, goodness gracious, this guy's mixed up. And, well, that's the end of him. And this is not seen as a bad outcome in the scriptures. It's seen as right. It should be the end of him. You need to use violence and force to protect what is truly right. And we assume that David is in some sense truly right in that he's God appointed as king and so on and so forth, until old age takes him, or the king, or God takes him in some other way. Look, I'll give you a tiny example. You might think this is trivial, but it's not. I thought you shouldn't kill. Does that mean a disease must continue living on you that's going to kill you? No. Doesn't. When a mosquito, takes your blood, it's not just charitable to let that continue. Probably because the mosquito could kill you if it's got malaria and so on. But symbolically in that it's feeding off you without regard to your welfare. This is very suspect. It creature to have close to you. It's like the dog that bites. If he bites your children, shouldn't you, if necessary, have the dog put down? Unless you can just abandon him out there in the wild somewhere and let him carry on such life as he can have without you. Do you see? I can remember having this dilemma with a dog that we'd rescued, and well, he would be out all day, and I don't know where, probably aggravating the farmer's sheep somewhere and cattle. Don't know, do you? But anyway, he'd come home in the evening, lay under the table, and if you went near him, he'd growl. You couldn't put him in the garden, he was staying under the table. Well, he's running your household, not you. You had to go. Now, then I was faced with the dilemma. Do I take him out into the country and abandon him and hope he finds such life as he can? Or do I take him to the pound and say, I'm sorry, this dog is uncontrollable and I can't live with him, in which case the pound would probably put him down. Well, I didn't want to kill him, so I abandoned him out in the Suffolk countryside. I didn't feel good about this, but I did feel right as regards protection of my family and myself, and not wanting to kill the dog and not needing to. But sometimes you do need to. You need to defend, and the only way you can defend is by killing. God understands. He's given you a primacy of self, and therefore your loved ones and near ones. Else you would quite quickly not exist, except he constantly intervenes with miracle. We're not in that sort of world in general. If you're convinced such a miracle exists, you may too find that you don't exist in this world quite quickly. You die. But I don't know. I'm not certain about that. You might have good reason to hold that that's not the case, that God will always support your primacy even though you're not defending yourself. Don't think that's rational. If God defends you, you should defend as well. I think. Not sure. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Father, that I'm not sure, and perhaps I don't need to be, or perhaps I do, and you'll reveal it. Love you. Thank you, Dad. Well, yeah, I definitely lean to the view that if God protects you, you're supposed to protect yourself as well. We copy the master sort of principle, you know. I definitely come down on that side at the minute. I don't know, but I do trust until led otherwise. Thank you, Dad.